Wherever you are, thank you for the opportunity to be here together. Nagan Juninho, hoping I am giving justice to the pronunciation, but in Denina that means you came to us. So I call this hearing to order. As we begin, we recognize the eyes of Alaska are not entirely upon us in this room today. They are on Ukraine and the war that Vladimir Putin has decided to wage on innocent people. I'm a few minutes late here, and I apologize for my tardy arrival, but I've been on a call with our Secretary of Defense, our Secretary of State, as members of the Senate. We're provided a little bit more detail about the situation and the latest developments. I wish that I could share that the news was good, and it is not. The events of the past day were not unexpected, but that does not make them any less devastating. We pray the good people of Ukraine will support them and our NATO allies, and we must make those who are perpetrating these horrific acts of war, Vladimir Putin, his cronies, and the entities that support them, we must make them pay through uncompromising sanctions and penalties. As we're watching events on the ground in Ukraine, we're more thankful than ever for the blessings of our democracy and all that it affords us, including the ability to hold congressional hearings on topics of our choosing at the time of our choosing and the place of our choosing, with the ability to speak freely without the threat of harm as we seek to shape the decisions of our constitutional government. So to turn to our hearing. Greetings to our witnesses, to the staff that are in attendance, everyone who is participating online. I am Anshawati, which means in Tlingit, Lady of the Land, and I'm honored to be an adopted member of the Deshitan clan. As your senior senator, as Alaska's senior senator, I serve as the vice chairman of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. This is the only committee in Congress that exists specifically to address the unique problems faced by American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native peoples. And it is through this position that I work to ensure Alaska Native voices are heard and reflected in the decisions being made across the federal level. And I'm proud of the work that comes out of our committee and what we have done thus far at this Congress. I've been talking a lot about the infrastructure bill that was just passed into law. This is going to bring sustained benefits to our Native communities, whether it is water and sanitation infrastructure, broadband, basic necessities that in far too many of our Native villages people have gone too long without. We're focusing now on the public safety crisis facing Native women and children in our state. We have been engaged and are proud to have advanced a bipartisan bill to address violence against women, and the fact that we haven't reauthorized that VAWA Act since 2013 is something that needs to be remedied. Focused not only on that, but the important tribal title that includes a pilot program for a limited number of tribes to exercise special domestic violence jurisdiction, concurrent jurisdiction with the states. So we're working to advance that this year. I share that because I think it is important for us to remember that there is much work that is coming out of the Congress right now that will help our Native peoples. But today we're here to talk about education and how we can achieve better education outcomes for Alaska Native students. So I want to first begin by thanking Alaska Pacific University for hosting the hearing. As many of you probably know, Peter Gordon Gould, an Alaska Native from Unga and APU's founder, saw the importance of education for Alaska Native students. He made it his mission to ensure that Indigenous leadership is reared, educated, and trained in Alaska for Alaska. So it's very fitting, I think, that we're here on the APU campus. We are pleased and honored to have Mr. Aaron Leggett to provide an acknowledgement regarding the Indigenous lands here in Anchorage. He is of Dena'ina Athabascan heritage. He serves as the president of the Native village of Eklutna. is also a senior curator of the Alaska History and Indigenous Cultures at the Rasmussen Center Anchorage Museum. Many accomplishments to Mr. Leggett's account, and we certainly appreciate him, but we are very thankful, sir, for your determination to preserve, perpetuate, and elevate the Dena'ina language and culture for future generations. So I turn to you, Mr. Leggett, to proceed.
Shanann, Senator. Yali Yanda Shishida Aaron Leggett Gashtanak Shichu Chata Dena'ina Shi Nulchinas Manchu Idlagat Skach Dish Tukda Rick Leggett Shumkda Diane. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Aaron Leggett. I am currently the president of the Native Village of Eklutna and the senior curator of Alaska History and Indigenous Cultures at the Anchorage Museum. And as the president of the Native Village of Eklutna, the only federally recognized tribe here within the municipality of Anchorage, it's my honor to provide a welcome here on Dena'ina Elfnena, or the Dena'ina homeland. As the senator said, I think it is fitting that we are here talking about education at Alaska Pacific University. A little over 2 months ago, on this very campus, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, a monumental piece of legislation. And one of the things that I was struck by was, as I was sitting commemorating this event, my involvement goes back about 20 years. I'm not that old, but I started when I was pretty young. And I knew that understanding tribal sovereignty and Alaska Native corporations and how they are economic drivers for our state was incredibly important. But one of the things that was interesting was during that presentation, as I was sitting there, they interviewed about a half dozen APU students who were about the same age I was 20 years ago, so about 20. And I was really struck by the fact that the things they were saying were the exact same things I said 20 years ago. So it told me that a whole lot really hasn't changed. And one of the fundamental problems, I believe, is with the lack of education around tribes in Alaska and the important role that Alaska Native corporations play on our state economy. It's my hope that through this Senate Field committee hearing, working in partnership with Alaska Native entities, we can transform education in our state the same way that we've transformed healthcare that's viewed around the world as a shining model. But we can only do that when we tell the history of Alaska from all perspectives, and we have a true and complete understanding of what it means for the state to have Alaska Native corporations and 220-something federally recognized tribes. So I just want to thank everybody that's here today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcomes that come from this. So this is really important to me, not only through the Native Village of Eklutna, but also through my role at the Anchorage Museum. We are committed to telling the story of Alaska. So I'm just honored to be here. So Shanann, Guninu, thank you, came here today.
Thank you, Mr. Leggett. So let's proceed with the hearing. I am so pleased that we're able to be here in Alaska for this field hearing in person. Field hearings are an opportunity to bring the Senate and the committee to you, the Alaska Native communities that we represent. So this is the first field hearing that we have had following the pandemic. And before the pandemic hit us all, I know education was certainly front of mind to many of us. But what we have all gone through over these past couple of years has made it even more of an imperative. Many states are trying new strategies and ideas, employing tools in innovative ways to enhance education opportunities and outcomes for Native students. We're seeing that, of course, here in Alaska too. One of those ideas I want to examine at this hearing is state-tribal collaboration on education compacts. I think it's important to remind ourselves that this idea of compacting is not entirely new. In 2013, Washington State set up the first state tribal education compacting program in the country. To date, there are 7 state compacted schools in operation with tribes in Washington State. And each of these schools were previously administered and managed by public K-12 schools run solely by local school districts with oversight by the state. So this idea of compacting education programs and services comes after decades of experience by tribes and tribal organizations utilizing Indian self-determination and education assistance act authorities for the betterment of their peoples. So ISDEA has proven successful when tribes assume control of federal programs and services that uphold federal trust responsibility. Mr. Leggett has spoken exactly to that. For example, here in Alaska, the Indian Health Service contracts or compacts 99% of its programs under ISDEA. The Alaska Tribal Health Compact is perhaps one of the most successful tribal compacts in the nation. It served as a model for resolving issues arising out of tribal self-governance compacts. State level also have the Alaska Tribal Welfare Compact that serves as another model. And it's these types of agreements between tribes and the federal or state government that allow decisions to be made at the local level, which reduces bureaucracy, helps tailor programs and services to better assist our communities. Building on self-determination and self-governance policies, Alaska has an opportunity to improve the educational outcomes of Native students. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Alaska Department of Education Early Development Commissioner, Dr. Michael Johnson. Pleased that you are with us here this afternoon. Julie Kitka, President of the Alaska Federation of Natives. We're looking forward to this discussion and understanding more about the current efforts to use state tribal compacting to address educational barriers that exist for Alaska Natives and American Indians. I'm also looking forward to hearing about other innovations such as tribal charter schools. Mr. William Nanning from Sea Line Corporation is going to be participating virtually to tell us about the tribal charter school in Cooper Bay that he helped start. And we will also hear from long-term and long-time educator Sandra Salaktuna Kowalski of NANA about her experiences in a variety of venues and how that has worked and what barriers still exist to helping Alaska Native students succeed. I think we know statistics about education outcomes and Native youth are not so good. The dropout rates for Alaska Natives and American Indians are considerably higher than other ethnicities and races in Alaska. For the 2020-21 school year, Alaska Natives and American Indians had the highest dropout rates in the state, 4.6% compared to 3.1% statewide. And these rates are consistently higher overall for Alaska Natives compared to non-Native students. Ayu Kasatuk of First Alaskans Institute shared in a recent dialogue hosted by UAA, said, if a plant is failing, you don't ask why it isn't good enough. You check its soil. Is it getting enough water? Is it getting enough sun? You investigate its environment. And it was these disparities that led the state and tribal organizations like AFN and First Alaskans Institute to take actions to try to find solutions. And we have seen homegrown solutions that are working. We see positive outcomes from the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute and their award-winning Baby Raven Reads program. Here in Anchorage, we can look to the Cook Inlet Tribal Council with their super fab lab. I've had an opportunity to visit, and I know that many of my staff were able to tour yesterday. The Indian Affairs Committee has also held hearings on restoring and perpetuating Native languages and cultures. Native languages are more than just words. They're a vital part of Indigenous cultures, identities, an important tool to understand Indigenous histories. Language is central to the continuity of culture for future generations. Native language immersion is becoming an effective tool in many states. We're seeing that certainly here in Alaska. Research demonstrates that when Native youth learn in culturally relevant classrooms with culturally relevant place-based curriculum, they succeed. I was in Juneau these past couple of days and had an opportunity to go over to the program there at Harborview with the Tlingit immersion, or the Tlingit language program, and listen to the kids as they shared with me their TikTok videos that they are they're learning not just to say the words, but they're learning how to dial, to share with one another. And these are some of the reasons why I have worked so hard, and I think it's so important that we continue this focus on Native language revitalization programs. So continue to work to advance that. Dr. Rosita Worrell of the Sealaska Heritage Institute stated in her written testimony that we have before the committee. She said, quality and equitable education for all students and the integration of Native arts, culture, history, language, and culture into schools are critical to the survival of Alaskan cultures, to the attainment of education success of Native students, and to the well-being of students, tribes, and communities. We also believe that cultural diversity contributes to the richness of our state and our nation. I include that statement because I absolutely concur with Dr. Worrell. I think it's very appropriate in terms of why we are here today. So with that rather lengthy I was going to say it's an introduction, but I'm now turning to the introductions. Again, I want to thank you all for being here and committing to work to ensure that our Native students receive quality and equitable education. So we will begin our testimony by coming around the table here. We'll begin with Julie Kitka. Again, I've introduced her as president of the Alaska Federation of Natives. Sandra Salaktuna Kowalski is the vice president of shareholder relations for the NANA Regional Board. She's the second vice chair of the Alaska State Board of Education. Dr. Michael Johnson is the commissioner of Alaska Department of Education and Early Development. And Mr. William Nanig is the general manager of Sealine Corporation. So I don't really feel this is fair to tell you that you only have 5 minutes to provide your summary of your testimony because I've taken so much time already. But I do think we want to have an opportunity for that discussion and the dialogue. Know that your full written statement is incorporated as part of the official hearing record. And so if you don't get to all of it, it will be certainly incorporated as part of that official record. So with that, we will proceed to Julie Kitka. Thank you. Not only thank you for being here, Julie, but thank you for your continued focus on prioritizing education and working to address what we all know to be the real disparities when it comes to Alaska Native students. So thank you for that encouragement.
Thank you, Senator. It's an honor testifying today. Chairman Schatz and team accompanied General Counsel, Executive Vice President for him, and then Vice President. So recognize them in case there's any questions that they step up to answer. Particular compact facilitates the negotiation of state compact negotiations, finance, and social services on child welfare. So, questions that bring that we'll address that specifically. First of all, I wanted to just ask that the testimony and the attachments that I attached to it be included for the record.
They will all be included.
Your attention to the piece on transformational education this pandemic. We have been working with the state and education compact primarily on the foundation that attempts to do that, builds the legal foundation of federal state level. Taking into account the special trust relationship that we have with the federal government, taking into account laws and regulations on the federal side, taking into account the state of Alaska's constitutional laws and regulations. And I'm delighted to tell you that this is absolutely a wonderful partnership between the Native community and the state of Alaska. I can report that the government of Alaska supports this. Mr. Johnson has testified supports this. The State Board of Education supports this. Legislation's been introduced on the Senate side, the House side of the legislature. Multiple hearings have been held on the state's Senate side. Annual legislation has been introduced on the House side. So far, strong bipartisan support behind this idea of a demonstration. So I'm thrilled with this progress because we think at this point in time, as we're all coming out of this pandemic, as we're dealing with the situation, all this confusion, resources into our state, everything, expansion, broad opportunities that provides us in healthcare and education, or that we can collaborate closely with the state, genuine options, and facilitate that strong. And so this is a prime example. Just amazing. And I want to do a shout out to Chairman of the State Senate Education Committee, Roger, Senate President, Senator Stevens out of Kodiak. This bill a couple of years ago. It's been working with us and updating it, trying to get a very simplified approach in the legislature. Not complicated. We're not trying to turn education to laser focus on how we have transformational education using compact as the vehicle. Not just transformational education, really want accelerated transformation. We look at the rate of change that we're dealing with in our lives, everything from connection, computers to cell phones to all the way to now artificial intelligence. The rate of change is happening so quickly. Education, you cannot just rely on how things have been done in the past. And I feel very strongly that transformational education that we're seeking is not teaching about our culture, teaching about our language, it's teaching through our culture. That's what's transformational about compacting. And the emphasis, innovation, the emphasis, culture-based education, which supports the needs of the child, the context in which the child lives in, content that they're being taught, but dynamically narrated, interrelated into the whole school system. Tremendous value of parents, their own education, but it's not satisfied. These schools have that, and our comments are not negative to anybody. It's just the rate of change is happening so fast that we need to accelerate to overcome the barriers for our children for learning, for them to achieve their full potential. We think in culture-based education, language is important, family and the community, cultural context, the cultural content, but as well as assessment, rigorous assessment. We want accountability for this demonstration project. Not asking people to take it on trust. Also, feel that the social and emotional development of children is critically important. Their self-worth, their cultural identity, their sense of belonging, their sense of connectedness. That all leads to greater education outcomes, student engagement, student achievement, and student behavior in the schools. We also believe that we need to, besides authorize the demonstration project on compacting, is target more resources for teacher preparation and development. Our teachers are so important to us, and their development should be viewed as an investment in our children, not as a requirement or something else. We also view that we need to ensure that the broadband is expanded to our communities and is seamlessly integrated into the school experience, including in our compact. So our testimony today and the comments we put in is not only for support for the demonstration on compacting, but is to ask for additional support for all the innovation that's going on right now. Compacting is not going to be for every community and every tribe, but let's go test it out. Let's do several demonstration projects. Let's prove the value and the worth. We've seen during this pandemic how strong our tribal health system has been, how durable, how innovative it is, and we want the same thing in our educational system. I want to also note for the record that tribal compacting is not just limited to the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the Indian Health Service. The United States government, the Congress, has authorized and engages in compacts with the island nations through the Compact of Free Association. We use national security, national interests and policy in our arrangement with those island nations. And the compacting is a very effective mechanism. We also, a number of years ago, moved some of the foreign aid out of foreign aid into the Millennium Challenge Corporation, in which those are 5-year compacts that are for mostly low and middle income countries. And they fund things such as railroads in Mongolia or transportation systems. And what's so unique about the compact is you're able to set up the goals at the beginning, you set up the accountability, you pledge the resources for doing them, and let people accomplish what they're doing. So this asking for the compacting on education is not new in U.S. federal policy, because we've already shown it is for Native policy, for national interest policy, as well as our programs that go around the world to all these countries on that is really proved out. Mongolia, for example, had their first 5-year compact. They did so well, they had it renewed for another 5-year compact. And you're seeing a lot of progress on that. So we view that with a lot of encouragement that this demonstration will prove the success and hold us accountable to make sure it is. Again, this is about systemic change. It's not about a Band-Aid. It is about how do you drive systemic change? How do you do it through our culture? How do you engage the Native people in the education of their own children? But we do not expect or want any lesser education. We want more, is what we're about. Again, I probably could go on and other things, but it's in the testimony, in the written testimony. But we wholeheartedly support it. We wholeheartedly support efforts to increase innovation, incentivize. I do have one request that I ask you to do is that rider that was put in 1994 prohibiting resources coming into Alaska on schools. We ask that that rider be withdrawn. That has the potential to continue a period of harming our schools and our educational system. And I want to give a little background on why we're making that request. When that rider was put in, and Senator Stevens put that in there, it was at the tail end of the BIA schools and the transfer of those BIA schools to the state. It was also at the time in which the federal government was transferring the railroad to the state and transferring a lot of things. What was at the heart of what was going on at that time was the resources coming into the state from Prudhoe Bay. It was the buildup of the permanent fund, and it was the recognition that the state of Alaska could not keep doing all these things on the federal level when you had such incredible wealth being created in the state in the permanent fund. It wasn't that the federal role in education should be diminished or eliminated, and we certainly think that that rider should disappear. Do we want to turn up education upside down on the national level? No, we're not. So we want that cautiously done and carefully done on that. But we don't want that rider anymore. We want the opportunity to engage with the Department of Interior and the Department of Education for improving education. We have sent a letter to the Solicitor of Interior, Bob Anderson, asking, detailing a lot of this information to them, asking for a legal opinion on use of the compacting authority within Department of Interior. They currently have broad compacting authority, which they push out the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we want to be able to use that compacting authority in this, as well as whether or not they're able to use the authority to get transfers of funding from other agencies, such as the Department of Education. The reason why we asked for that, and we don't have the answer yet on that, is we didn't want to wait for you and the committee to get us the official language that says Department of Education can compact directly or Department of Justice can compact. At this point, just so we can speed it up and move faster, we want the ability to use Interior's compact authority. And we think it would be beneficial on multiple fronts in the department, especially with the load up of resources on infrastructure and everything. If other agencies and departments are able to run targeted through those ones to get them out to where they needed to be done. But on this education one in particular, we want to not only look at what Interior's got that could pertain, but more importantly, Department of Education and their efforts for innovation. Again, we're not seeking to overturn everything and cause chaos or anything, but we do want that provision removed and for us to move down a path to have full implementation of the federal trust responsibility. It's something that when we took on this project working with the commissioner, that was one of our fundamental things we agreed on, is that we were going to do everything we could to strengthen that federal trust responsibility. We weren't going to do anything to weaken it. So with that, Madam Chairman, I'll conclude my testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. You answered several of the questions that I had in front of me, so we'll have an opportunity to do that. Sandy, welcome to the committee and thank you.
I am recently named as Vice President of Shareholder Relations for Nana Regional Corporation. I can tell you that I've been an educational professional all of my life until recently, moving into this new role. And I want to speak to you today as a career educator and let you know that my passion has been creating healthy and engaging and meaningful opportunities that contribute to the health and well-being of my people. I come here to share my perspective on growing up Indigenous in the American school system and what I see or what I envision will improve outcomes for Alaska Native students. I do want to touch on, I do want to share my appreciation to AFN for their work with the commissioner here. I'm also a state board member and I want to share the state board's appreciation for that level of work and commitment. I think that we can all say that's what's moved the wheel and things are, there's some gears now and we really appreciate that. I also appreciate that the focus is on not diminishing any of the federal trust responsibility and helping us learn more about the legal and regulation pieces that would support this. So I want to offer mine and board's appreciation to AFN, as I'm sure the commissioner will as well. But first and foremost, I'm coming to you here as a long-term educator. I will have to say that I've been telling people ever since I've become a state board member and I've had an ability to move above things, that I don't think that Alaskan classrooms are that different from classrooms in the lower 48 yet. I think even though we have classrooms here that use cultural standards to help guide lessons so that they're culturally relevant, it still isn't much different than the lower 48. The system is just built the way it is right now. We've got curriculum, textbooks, teaching practices, even our extracurricular activities in our calendar year, they're baked in from hundreds of years of a Western education system. In the decades that I've worked as an educational professional, I've really been, in the past few years, I've been able to put some words to some dissonance that I've always experienced as an educational professional. I grew up in the lower 48 and in Alaska, and I've also attended one of those tribal schools that you mentioned in Washington State. And I attended Chief Leschi Indian School when it was a brand spanking new school in the basement of a church. I've also helped to start Nagacho Tribal School, Pataskio, Alaska, and I've been a working member of many efforts to improve outcomes for students through cultural activities and cultural and language revitalization efforts. And that we have to do more than change the resources we have in front of our students. We have to get at the gut of what I feel like I experienced as dissonance growing up. There is a point when you're an Alaska Native student or an American Indian student where you realize that you might not have been intended to be there at that moment in that classroom. You're sitting there in a history class and you're learning about manifest destiny and U.S. assimilation policies, and you're accountable for that knowledge, and you're answering test questions on that information that you're learning in history, and no one's addressing it, but it's occurring to you. And this has got to be happening. It didn't just happen. You have to talk to other people. There's a point in your life where you're like, I'm Indigenous, I'm Native American, I'm Alaska Native, and everything here in this school system just feels a little disconnected, or I feel a little disconnected right now. So the only way that I feel that we can truly, for Indigenous people, have an education system that doesn't do that to them is to have an education system that is not only by Alaska Natives, but it's for Alaska Natives, which benefits all people in our area, and it's of Alaska Natives. We've created the educational system that's the most meaningful for our community. I think I've already made the point, I'm looking through this here, that simply tweaking resources that exist won't get at what I'm doing. I think we can all acknowledge that when a maybe publishing company realizes that they need to change something in a textbook used in American schools, it really doesn't get at the heart of what is done when you're trying to rewrite portions of textbooks to address American Indian, Alaska Native history in these textbooks. It still doesn't get at it because it's still not of, for, and by the Indigenous people and the communities. So that's a little bit about one of the reasons I've been driven to kind of work in this area as a public educator. I've worked in the system. I was an administrator, one of those gung-ho principals when NCLB came out. I was astonished at what some of the implications would be, but gosh darn it, Alaska Natives were a demographic that we were finally going to hold schools accountable for, and that got me excited for about a year and a half or two because I started to realize about some of the other mechanisms in it. So I've been a good soldier as a public educator in our state system, responding to federal regulations and other well-intended practices that get put into place in classrooms in Alaska. And all the well-intended practices aren't going to make as deep enough as a difference unless we as Alaska Natives are creating our own educational systems that our students are participating in. I have this vision that we'll have a fourth grade boy who is not even understanding that he's in a science mode, but he's out checking his rabbit snare, and he's understanding the human impact to his environment because he's talked to elders already about what is respectful practices for harvesting animals in that setting for that type of animal, and he's learning about the human impact through his elders. He's also able to understand the cultural practices and the deep connections to the land through that activity, and not through English, but through Inupiaq. I believe that's entirely possible. We're at a point now where there is collective energy and synergy, and not just in the Inupiaq region where I'm from, but through many areas of the state where we have people of all ages. I work and work near people of all ages through cultural and language revitalization work right now. And that synergy is really ready to bust loose of the systems that are in place and help create the innovation and vision that is ready to be put into place when compacting comes around. And as a side note, the State Board of Education right now is, our goal is to make sure we're removing the barriers for regulation for state compacting. We're paying attention to the overarching activity around tribal compacting, but we're also paying attention to what school systems may need once this innovation is allowed to happen, is empowered to happen. So we're looking at teacher preparation as one of our key pieces to make sure, we could get all kinds of regulations in the way of that. But when we're thinking about an Indigenous teacher pathway, our state board is making sure that we're already looking ahead to make sure we're supportive of it. We're not going to get in the way of it, and we're actually going to try to help support the pathways that do get developed for teacher pathways and tribal compacting. Look through here. I know that Julie touched on this already, but I want to give you a little bit of personal experience around language revitalization and young children, and how Inupiaq language revitalization really is an additive piece of their growing up in Alaska. So English is always going to be there in Alaska. I do not have to worry about any of my children or grandchildren learning to read, write, or speak English. They're going to get that. But while they get that, if I don't also help focus on being Inupiaq and their connection to their family and their land, I think I take away something from them. My two youngest sons, I have 4 sons, my 2 youngest learned to read and write in Inupiaq first. They went to Nikito Tribal School in Kotzebue. Collectively, I could say that those 2, when I look at all 4 of my sons, they learned to read first in English once they went to the public school. They learn to focus academically, and they learn to be very respectful in a public school classroom. They had the grounding at Nagajo Tribal School where they learned to read in an orthography that's pretty recent. Let's face it, our Indigenous language orthographies are recent. So what that means when you're teaching children how to read is it's a really clean system for them to make sense based on what we already know about the science of reading, sound letter correlations, and picking up how to read words that might be unfamiliar with to them. These were kids that going to Nagajo who spoke English first, ended up in a Inupiaq immersion program at 3 years old and learned to read in Inupiaq. And the skills they applied are exactly the types of skills I see happening in really effective reading classrooms. It's applied to Inupiaq, and they were both strong readers for it. The other thing that I want to share is while my kids were at Nagajo, I was the principal in the public school that Nagajo students fed into. And I have to say that those students at Nagajo, I saw them go from, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, and then they would exit into a middle school setting. I got to sit there at every quarterly award ceremony at our school, and I knew because I was connected to Nagajo. June Nelson Elementary, the public school was 500 students large, but I always knew which ones were Nagajo students because of my close involvement. And at those award ceremonies, there was a lot of academic recognition, but I think what was most meaningful to our elders who were involved with Nagajo and who understood and what they really wanted out of Nagajo was that most of those students receiving awards for behavior, respectful behavior, engagement in hard work, helping others, those were always, 20 students come out of Nagajo at 500 student school. I would say always 50% or more were Nagajo students because they had had a grounding towards respectful behavior towards elders, respectful behavior towards teachers, ways that they were engaged at the very beginning with their environment around them that I think really grounded them. And knowing that they had that connection to their language and culture that their family had provided for them, I think there's a whole lot that goes into a child's sense of why school is important. And when you know that parents choose this for you, there is so much value in what a child puts into it and what they do after that for the rest of their lives. And so I really am excited about this conversation about innovative practices in education. I lost track of time, but I did want to say that it's important for us not to forget as we really work towards innovative programs that make a cultural foundation for our students, a language foundation for our students, that we also know that this addresses that otherness that I really believe that a lot of us who have come through American westernized school systems feel as we start to realize what an American school system does to an Indigenous person on their homeland. So, you're sitting there in an Alaska Native classroom and you're learning about things that really you start to think, was I meant to be here? Gee, I'm on my own land. I think that these innovative practices that we're talking about can finally erase that kind of dichotomy or dissonance, I don't know what other words to give it, that you experience being Alaska Native in a classroom where it's not of, for, and by your people that you're being educated in. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Dr. Johnson, let's turn to you, please. Thank you.
For the record, I am Michael Johnson, and I have the privilege to serve as Alaska's Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Education and Early Development. Vice Chair Senator Murkowski, thank you for putting this into your schedule. I know you're very busy visiting the state and for holding this field hearing, and thank you for all your work on behalf of Alaska students that you do every day in the Senate. And as Member Kowalski said, thank you to AFN, the State Board of Education, members of the legislature, the governor, all who have rallied around this vision. The vision of the state of Alaska's Department of Education and Early Development is set forth in Alaska Statute 1403-015, stating that all students will succeed in their education and work, shape worthwhile and satisfying lives for themselves, exemplify the best values of society, and be effective in improving the character and quality of the world about them. To accomplish this outcome, the Alaska State Board of Education adopted the priority to create the option for self-governance compacting for the delivery of education between the state of Alaska and tribes, or with tribally empowered Alaska Native organizations. As you know, while some students are able to flourish in our current system, far too many are not. We are not and must not be satisfied with the current status of education outcomes provided for our students. When we see students not able to realize their full potential, even with the help of hardworking educators, we must examine the system that is failing our students. A state tribal education compact provides a pathway for the needed systemic change in Alaska. For this reason, our character and our conscience requires that we press on towards systemic change. Though I have no doubt there were many good intentions, our public education system started out without the proper understanding, respect, and vision for Alaska students, particularly our Alaska Native students. Because of that lack of respect and understanding, in some cases, unfortunately, deliberate disrespect, our education system has not had a positive impact on Alaska Native languages and culture. Our character and conscience now requires that we demonstrate our respect and value of Alaska Native culture and language by entering into compacts for education so our students can restore and revitalize what has been diminished by ineffective education outcomes. Supporting tribal education compacting recognizes that the growing achievement gap and educational failures are complex and not simply a result of a lack of hard work by educators or students. It sends a clear message that this is a problem with the system of education, and as such can be fixed by addressing the need for systemic change. It's our obligation as educational leaders to provide the necessary supports to make this change, and it can only come to fruition through the true partnership and honest engagement. Throughout the past 6 years, the Department of Education and Early Development, tribes, Native organizations, and other partners have had an ongoing conversation to determine what is needed for students to be able to be supported to shape worthwhile and satisfying lives for themselves. In 2018, at the Elders and Youth Conference, our tribal liaison, Joel Isaac, asked the attendees if they could design the perfect school, what would it look like? Here's how they replied, as summarized by Joel. They said, we would not get rid of math, reading and writing, or all standardized tests, but we would have them secondary to cultural values, an equal amount of Native and non-Native teachers. The community would teach every child, and there would be good food, traditional languages, and English would be both traditional languages and English would be both taught, and there would be place-based curriculum. The same group of elders and youth said that their favorite thing about school was learning and learning new things. Our students deserve an education system that provides them, for them, a place to learn, belong, and excel at life. Compacting is a critical and necessary endeavor that needs to be supported by both the state of Alaska and the federal government. And finally, the pandemic has given us proof that this is our pathway forward. When the history of this pandemic is written, tribes will receive credit for how they responded and helped care for all Alaskans. Many schools remained open throughout this year because of compacted tribal health. Many of our teachers and students and their families, Alaska Native and non-Native, were treated and or vaccinated through tribal health. Tribes have proven that when we let go of the restrictive confines of our systems and partner and coordinate with tribal governments, good things happen for all Alaskans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mr. Commissioner. And now we have Mr. William Nanig, who is with us virtually. He's with the Sea Line Corporation, and we will wait to get him up on the screen here.
Thank you. Thank you, President, Vice Chairman Lisa McCarskey, President, Vice Chairman, Honorable Chairman Brian Schultz. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to testify. My name is Nick, General Manager for Sea Line Corporation, Alaska Native Corporation, Alaska Native Village Corporation of Hooper Bay, Alaska. Alaska Native Village Corporation of Hooper Bay, Alaska. As an advocate for those in my community and of rural Alaska education system, my message to you is that rural Western education system has long recognized for many reasons that it has not successfully worked for Alaska Native students, and its product has adversely affected many of the predominantly Native populated communities. There is a process of attending to Alaska Native students' needs, experience, and feelings, and intervening so that they learn particular things and go beyond that given. The new rural school statistics of the state of Alaska indicator is showing as an example of one possible way seen through the outcomes of Cooper Bay charter school students' academic assessments. We can, maybe, there's an echo here. All right. We can begin to reverse those extreme of Alaska Native labeling coming out of most of our rural schools. Beginning with this national U.S. Senate hearing to address what we all think of as the causes of the present conditions. For instance, high rates of absenteeism among our UPIC students, which comes across as a lack of enthusiasm about learning, achieving to outsiders. What is perceived as lack may be further from the reality. UPIC parents and our students want to succeed in reading, mathematics, and science. We have a continual problem in retention, high rates of suspension and expulsion among students in our community. Native cultures have a lot to offer to the society, which can be used as a fulcrum to flip this around. I live with these individuals and I have seen them successfully engage in our difficult, complex, ambitious way of life. We are not seeking for shortcuts, enabling, but get individuals to see how vital education is to us. Our community, indigenous family embodied change as we formed Cooper Bay Charter School and received final approval to operate by the State Board of Education in the autumn of 2019. Now, Cooper Bay Charter School is improving the lives of the students 4th to 8th grade, and in the short time we've operated. Our school must overcome continual challenges. Most notably, rural schools like Cooper Bay Charter School require funding for innovative pathways to train and employ local educators. Also, the charter school has been forced to lease inadequate space, resulting in low enrollment. Our Alaska Native students are truly deserving of their own facility. It is imperative that communities like Cooper Bay have the assurance of equitable resources to perceive adequate education system. Multi-age and multidisciplinary. Student pairing and having different age and grade groups in a classroom setting seems to facilitate higher learning and knowledge retention among Alaska Natives. This may be more culturally appropriate. Cooper Bay Charter School has used an interdisciplinary and multi-age approach to students in 4th to 8th grade. Interdisciplinary model has many advantages. It allows the students to learn by making connections between ideas and concepts across different disciplinary boundaries. Students learn Students learning in this way are able to apply the knowledge gained in one discipline to another different discipline in a way to deepen learning experience. In this model, students will become highly motivated as they have invested interest in pursuing local science and engineering topics that are relevant to them. As a result, the content is often rooted in life experiences, giving an authentic purpose for learning and connecting to a real-world context. Consequently, learning becomes meaningful, purposeful, and deeper, resulting in learning experience that stays with the student for lifetime. An interdisciplinary model also allows students to cover topics more deep in depth because they are considering the, the many and varying perspectives from which a topic can be explored. Critical thinking skills are used and developed as students look across disciplinary boundaries to consider other points of views and begin to compare and contrast concepts across subject area and synthesized ideas. There are also many advantages to multi-grade model, namely the opportunity to experience leadership for older students, cooperative learning, and culturally appropriate family and community inclusive atmosphere. In summary, as children growing up in rural Alaska and as first-time students, our parents, our elders, as they prepared us for school, they project to us that the school was a safe environment by saying, be loving to others. Similarly, our charter school principal's motto, as the students assemble for class, would say out loud, be kind to others, and have the students repeat the same words. The principal leads by instructions to the staff and to the students. The school encourages the parents and extended family members to be in this community involvement extends to classified staff by allowing them to lead in tracks. On the onset of the COVID pandemic and the uncertainty it created, the school put together lesson packages for each student, and we had 65% pickup of those instruction materials by parents, and the staff delivered the remainder of the packages to their homes. Our observation through the school, uh, our observation to grade school academic assessments in the first year of the charter school, the fourth through eighth grade students were not ready to be taught in the grade level that they entered, and they will not very well achieve proficiency unless the instructor provided remedial lessons to get them near where they should be. The general school and education system have been moving Alaska Native students along, so they end up graduating with ninth or so grade level education. The strength and the success of University of Alaska Anchorage Alaska Native Science and Engineering Program is their adamant and insistence that the students enrollment is based on their level of knowledge on subjects like reading and math. Otherwise, when many rural school graduates start off with college credit courses, they are set up for failure. This was the impetus change in Hooper Bay. Our community took control of our students' academic future. When the school idea was proposed to Alaska Native Village Corporation Board of Directors, the immediate acceptance did not happen overnight. rather, it was built through many years of their educational support by providing scholarships and donations to school activities. When I went before the State Board of Education, two questions I was asked: how would we get parents involved and improve student attendance? My answer was, many students do not live in traditional family settings. Many of them live in dwellings with extended families and multiple single family parents. Establishing with the approval of the State Board of Education, Rural Yukon School District Regional School Board, and Native Village of Hooper Bay, it permitted our tribe a means to access federal funding created to benefit Alaska Native students by developing new school activity based on science, technology, engineering, and math, and offering science in a manner that is culturally familiar with the students. More importantly, Academic Policy Committee, the governing board, has learned how fragile this is. Many due to the lack of infrastructures like facilities and utilities that Honorable Senator Bukowski had mentioned earlier. Many rural village political elected representatives also lack the savvy and the resources to firmly establish the foundation it and the Ceylon Corporation Board of Directors have built. Another being our disproportionate reliance on federal funds. Our recommendations are other than the need for proper public infrastructure of facilities and utilities, pedagogy is a universal concept. Our Yupik cultural way of knowing and should be included by academics of elders' participation. Elder guidance practiced by doing and experimental learning, detailed observation, intuitive analysis, cooperative learning, and listening. Elders understand about early childhood development, children's needs, and that they can succeed. Charter schools have developed curriculum that reflects our environment. This should become the federal Indian academic curriculum. Village science and village math used by elders should be used to make our youth understand the basic science and math concepts. Honoring our children's cultural lifestyle should be the part of the focus to focus traditional learning of our way of life, focusing on weather predictions, flora, fauna management, fisheries, learning subsistence, fishing, hunting practice, and it's about self-esteem. Above all, it means self-esteem. Just as Hooper Bay structured its charter school within the school district, this should expand more Indian education funding into this program. This is about local policy control. What I am recommending is not new. It is the federal government that can enact these policies to make innovation happen for Native students proud of who they are. Pedagogy is the Alaska Native culture of Alaska Native cultures taught in school curriculum can only succeed if the state and federal bureaucracy adopts the science, local science, math, and native lifestyles are accepted into norm. Indian education funds should also be about local policy, local control, and decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I appreciate it. It's been helpful to hear both from William and Sandy in terms of the reason why we're having this discussion about about alternatives and recognizing the role that compacting can play here. So I want to start off my questions, and it's perhaps a little more technical, and I'll direct them to you, Julie, and to you, Commissioner. And it's kind of along the lines of how we will effectuate this. We have, as part of the record, we have written testimony that's been provided to us by the U.S. Department of Education, and it states that STEC schools in Alaska would be eligible for the department's formula funding if the schools are authorized by the state in a way that meets the federal definition of a local educational agency or a school district. We know that formula funds, whether Title I grants that come, or Title II, Title IV, impact aid, these are all programs that would be eligible through the department. So we are at a point where we're trying to figure out how we advance this through the state. And I guess the question to you, Julie, is whether or not you're satisfied with the Department of Education's testimony that seems to indicate that we don't need legislative authority for a demonstration here in Alaska. Are we in a good place there? We've got legislation that is working its way through the process, but I'm trying to make sure that here in the state, we're going to be doing something consistent that U.S. Department of Education is going to be, I guess, good with our approach.
Madam Chair, I think that the best way to think of this is we're doing a hybrid. And so there will be a federal role and there's a state role. We want to protect the federal trust responsibility on education, but we also want to maximize the state of Alaska's responsibility under the Constitution of what they're obligated to do. So it's really a hybrid. And I think
and you think that hybrid, if I can just interject, you think that hybrid does protect the federal trust responsibility when it comes to
in regard to the federal trust responsibility, that's what I would consider a living responsibility, and it will always adapt and change. It's kind of like the way I describe ANCSCA. It's a living law intended to meet the real social and economic needs of the Native people. And so we keep coming back to the Congress. We need this, we need that, because circumstances change. It's the same way I view on the federal trust responsibility in education. It depends on the needs of our people and what we need from the federal government and the federal Department of Education. So nothing will ever, quote, satisfy it, but do I think that there needs to be legislation introduced today on the federal level to authorize a compact school? No. Do I think that we need to remove the rider? Yes, I think that would be good, and it would also be a sign that we're moving more to treating Alaska Native education, but it doesn't need to immediately turn anything upside down. I do think.
Can I ask you about that, though, on the rider itself? And I understand what you've shared about why you're making that specific ask here. But I want to make sure that it's clear you're not suggesting that that we have BIE schools here in Alaska. We all know that
This is all forward, this is all forward-looking. It's not backwards. We're not asking for BIA schools. We're asking for state schools with the federal trust responsibility supported. At this time, what we think the federal government needs to do is remove that barrier. We also think that the federal government should incentivize innovation. We need more funding and resources for incorporating Indigenous knowledge into curriculum. I'll give it as an example. AFN had a National Science Foundation grant together with the Annenberg Foundation that went for 10 years, and it was all on incorporating Indigenous knowledge into curriculum. We need to multiply that and scale those type of efforts up. That effort, we had a partnership with the state, we had a partnership with 23 school districts, the University of Alaska. We had Oscar Coagley, we had a number of distinguished Native educators involved in running that. We need to scale up those type of opportunities, but particularly incorporating Indigenous knowledge into curriculum, also in teacher development preparation. There just is not enough current resources going into these things. We think those two in particular need to go side by side with the compacting. Plus, we need to have the Federal Department of Education incentivize innovation. Whether or not you're talking about the X prize that they give.
what you think it's
But
of incentivizing the innovation, because I think that's what we're talking about here. We're trying to look at the delivery of education outside of just the math and reading. And so share with me what you think that might look like.
I think that use and adaptation of technology, the e-learning. I mean, in our health system, we are moving a lot to the telehealth. How can we incentivize our schools and our systems to develop the best of the best? I mean, really, my standards for the compacting and for our whole education system is I think we've got a race to catch up to keep those standards up really high. And so incentivizing, adaptation of technology that's going to incentivize development of curriculum, incentivize, collaboration. I mean, one of the things that I think this work with Commissioner Johnson has proved, we can do a lot more working together with the state and the federal government than in ourselves, just by ourselves, and incentivize collaboration, ways that we work together, not where one's telling another what to do on that, but work together. And I really do think our future as Native people here depends upon our developing our young people to be the best that they can be, that they're well-grounded, they're secure, they're healthy. The sky is the limit on what they can do, whether or not they want to be an astronaut, that they want to be a scientist, if they want to be a teacher, if they want to be a fisherman. We cannot lower our aspirations for our children, but what we have to have is an educational system that values where they come from, their culture and values, and support what their parents want for them on their culture and values, and not have people at odds at each other. So that's where I think that we can make some systemic change. I know that people have said, well, how do you measure some of this? I think we have to let that process go as we're having our tribes negotiate with the state, and you're going through the negotiation process where you would build accountability into these compacts and do that. But let some of that unfold. We don't have the answers all today, but we do know what we want is we want better things for our children. But we also pay attention on the federal level. There's these massive resources moving around from the infrastructure bill and other things. And some of that will be going into education, and we don't want any of that to be prohibited for our rural areas and our communities. And
Let me ask you, Dr. Johnson, on this issue of how do we judge the success? Because that's a question that I'd actually like to ask all of you in terms of what is that metric of success for our Native students around the state? And you deal with a system that has, you've got assessment standards that you have to meet in order to take advantage of certain federal resources, that level of accountability. Oftentimes you don't have the level of flexibility that I think we would like to have as we're trying to really allow for I think, a transformative approach to education. But when you're trying to make systemic change, that can be a bit of a challenge too. So I think I've neglected to just say thank you for the extraordinary collaboration that I think we have had between the state and AFN and so many on this issue, because I think it demonstrates a commitment to get to yes and to try to be innovative in this space. But you've got a situation again where the state still has to work in coordination with U.S. Department of Ed, and they have their requirements in terms of what eligibility for receiving federal formula grants, what those requirements are for state and STEC schools. So it's going to be, as I understand it, it's going to be DEED that is responsible for determining whether or not the STEC schools meet the definition of that has been set out by the Department of Ed. So it's not Department of Ed there. But how are you comfortable with where we are right now in ensuring that this pilot that we're talking about and these schools can be authorized in conformance with this definition? It's kind of technical and weedy, but yet when we're trying to talk about resources that come, we want to make sure that we're going to be setting this up in a way to take full advantage of those resources. Are we in a good space?
Thank you for the question. So I think so, but first I'll say, the department, we're proceeding making no assumptions that, because we're in a good space today, that we'll be in a good space tomorrow, because it is a complex system that we're operating in. And we certainly want to be respectful of that and respectful of all our partners. And so we're trying to proceed carefully and cautiously. But the second thing I would say is the reason I feel like we're in a good space is because my confidence isn't in the bureaucracy, it's in our partnership with the tribes and AFN. And so that's why thank you for the part you played in providing COVID relief funding. And we saw that as a great opportunity. And so we called AFN and said, would you be willing to partner with us? And we could give them a grant, because the way it seems like we've always done it before is the bureaucracy has confidence in itself and then presents possibilities. And what we decided is, we can give them a grant and say, will you help us imagine the possibilities? And then the bureaucracy react to that instead of the other way around. So I think we're in a good spot because we're placing our confidence in the partnership with tribes rather than the bureaucracy, and they're helping us navigate our own bureaucracies because they have expertise, especially with the federal government that we don't have.
Yeah, I guess we just have to look at it just a little bit differently, which is what we're trying to do here, is looking at things a little bit differently. But the point that Julie made about in terms of assessments, we kind of figure that out as we go. You're in a situation here where you're going to be introducing new statewide assessments, or a whole assessment system later this year. And so how do we fit this in that? Walk me through that. And I realize that we may be trying to push something, or the round peg into the square hole type of a thing. And if we are, tell me that, because I want us to be in a place where, again, we're able to maximize resources, maximize partnerships. But I also know that when you're dealing with federal funding and opportunity, they're not as flexible a system as we would like them to be.
Right. I guess I'll start with the place where I think we all are aligned. This U.S. Department of Education, the Secretary, he was invited and spoke on this at AFN, and we appreciated that. The tribes and the state bureaucracy, the Department of Education, The place where I think we all agree is the destination, and that is a great education for every kid. And the federal government, the federal bureaucracy, everybody acknowledges that that's where we all want to be. What we're proposing is not a new destination, but a journey. So a new pathway to get to that destination. And that's where we have to work through all these rigid requirements and things like that. And so we keep reminding everybody of what we agree on. And the other thing I would say is the reason that I think, this is a great time is because after the pandemic, there is a hunger to explore new ways of doing things. What did we learn from the pandemic? And what's it going to look like post-pandemic? And that includes the U.S. Department of Education. And I know, meetings that I have with my fellow state chiefs, they may not know what that looks like, but there's certainly an appetite there to explore. And so I think the time is right. And as President Kitka said, we may not have all the answers today, but it seems like the opportune time to be connecting with those partners and say, we have an idea, and maybe this is an idea that will satisfy that appetite that seems to be for innovation. So that doesn't provide you a specific example, but I just think that the time is opportune.
No, I appreciate this because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, wow, I lead off with all of the reasons why it can't be done, all of these barriers that are out there because you have this inflexible system. And I'm just reminded of the desire to try to do something different, even though you know that you got a system that is just hard. But I think it is also a recognition that the status quo is not helping our kids.
Right.
And if you just sit back, accept the status quo, we will put more generations of young Alaska Natives behind. Sandy, I want to ask you because I had the benefit of having my two sons in a language immersion program here in Anchorage, and it was a two-way immersion. And the thing that I loved most about it was when your son, who's in kindergarten, first grade, says, I'm so smart the first day of the class because teacher's talking in English and I get it. And then in the afternoon, when it's full on Spanish, he doesn't know the words. His best buddy, who was maybe struggling on the English side of the morning, is now the expert. And it empowers the language and the skills is so empowering in ways that I think sometimes as adults we forget that. But I also recognize that you can't do any of this unless we have the teachers. And William has mentioned the role of the elders involved, which I know we value and we appreciate. But I'm curious to know as to how we build out the teachers that we need in order to do what every one of you is suggesting, because we just can't take a teacher who's been in the classroom here, who's a super great math teacher, but she may be from Iowa, great teacher, but you can't make that translation to what we're talking about here. So what do we need to be doing more of? The fact that we're here at APU, the fact that Illicksavik has good programs. What more do we need to do? How can Congress help to facilitate the growth of more of our educators?
Let me start off by describing a vision I have for what a teacher program might look like. First of all, it would look nothing like the teacher programs we have now, the teacher prep programs we have now. Because in order to revitalize language and culture in a community, you have to prepare the adults who are going to be teaching in those classrooms how to cycle through and create more of a corpus. There isn't a lot of curriculum material readily available for an immersion program. Some are further ahead, but there isn't a lot. And it's going to take decades of that kind of forward-moving work to make this, the corpus strong for language revitalization. So a teacher preparation program has to orient a teacher who can work with elders, who can, this is why it looks nothing like a teacher pathway program we have now, who can work with elders, who can work with transcriptions and translation and help create that corpus of material that is being captured from the elder right then, or even from elder recordings from the 70s, 80s. My region, we have tons of valuable environmental knowledge captured in recordings when John Schaefer and other people who were just coming out at the time of ANCSA, they realized those resources were going to be, they saw ahead and they created programs where all of that was captured. So our future teachers in an indigenized school needs to be able to approach all of that knowledge. So they've got to become adult learners of the language right away. And they've got to be able to approach elders in a way that helps capture that knowledge that the elders have and capture the way that the elders understand learning should be. I don't think there's an elder I've ever worked with who doesn't understand from their life experience in a rural community how we should treat each other. That's important too. So our teachers have to be oriented towards an indigenized way of approaching and creating a classroom environment. And that happens by working with the elders, by working with others who are working in this effort, and working with the knowledge set that is important for our students that are going to be in that classroom. That knowledge set is going to be totally grounded in history, culture, stories, celebrations. Those exist. And, you know, we're rapidly losing elders who know it.
Is it being done anywhere?
It is, yes. There are language revitalization programs that help that do capture the elders' knowledge and create teachers while they're capturing the elders' knowledge. The Salish language program in the Northwest area is an example of a revitalization effort that it sounds small. Right now it's like 8 teachers a year have graduated as proficient language speakers. But when you think about gaining 8 language speakers, the offside is like my language right now, but we don't have that. We're just losing speakers every year, and we're losing the elder ones. The Salish language program and other revitalization efforts are creating young adult speakers with decades of professional years ahead of them for teaching in classrooms, creating curriculum, helping our governance councils bring back the language into governance work. You know, it's just ripe right now. And I do have to say, there is a lot of energy out there from young people who are graduating from college with communication degrees, education degrees, engineering degrees, where they are trying to make space in their own personal lives, knowing they will be young parents or aunts or uncles. And they're also making space for this type of work and energy while they perform full-time lives. And they are also the people who are creating the vision for the future. They see themselves as parents and grandparents. They already know that they're going to be elders who have a responsibility to recapture and move forward things that we've lost in the last 50 years.
So let me ask on that, and William, you mentioned this, that you had a couple challenges. You wanted to try to do more to involve parents in the schools, but also to get student attendance up. And it's this issue of parents into the schools, whether it's just to be an involved parent or to get that adult who is saying, I want to be that teacher. I want to be that elder. I want to be there to share the cultural values there as part of the classroom. And I think we all know that for many that are not in school now, but who went through school, that the education system was not only not built for them, it was something that they have tried to forget. And as they have tried to forget, it has been a challenge to not only involve themselves as parents in the school, but even to encourage their children that attending school is meaningful. And so William, I don't know if you can speak to that aspect of it and share if you've seen a level of success in doing that. But I think it is something that we can get the students, get the young people excited about what's going on in the classroom. But I'm worried that there's like a generation gap in terms of uh, uh, not enthusiasm for education, but just feeling the value of being in that school. And so, William, I'd like you to speak to that, and then Commissioner, if you could comment on that as well, I'd thank you. William?
Thank you, Sen- thank you, Senator McCarthy. You know, we suggest that while we are waiting for the things to change externally, we need innovation in instruction. That the shift can help to teach all students where they are in their learning pathway. You know, all too often we think that learning science and math, also cultural learning, are outside. They are, or they are in the core curriculum of our people. Yeah, for too long, culture has been a separate class. This this does not help native students learn. Um, um, you know, I'd like to share that. I'd like to share one thing. You know, our people here know when there's going to be a successful berry season by looking at the environment that is happening right now. You know, when there is a crust of ice on top of the snow, we can predict there would be an abundant berries. Also, at this time, until the breakup of Yukon River, if there's a prevailing wind that's going on, we know that there's going to be abundance in salmon. These climate change that we're observing right now have caused that prevailing wind that used to go to Gulf of Alaska is now coming up the Bering Sea, and it's blowing that water that's coming out of Yukon, maybe across to the coast of Siberia. So that could be one of the main reasons why there might be salmon crashes that are happening, um, and the salmon catches that are happening right now may not be getting reported across the Bering Sea. So we science and math are already in our culture. It's not a Western concept. The Western concept of science and math is based on native culture, not native culture. For instance, um, those those are my answers. I was going to provide an example. Um, example of maybe I should mention right now. That Pythagorean theorem is it's only known what now as we know it is because it was written then, but it was used by native people 1,000 years before. So that's my answer.
It's math and science or what we would classify as the educational attainment, but you're probably learning more in physics and science and to your point, the Pythagorean theorem. So, Commissioner, in terms of the parental involvement aspect, and what that means also for student engagement, would you comment on that?
Yeah, I think, and maybe I'll start broad and come in. And you articulated this well. Look, I can go to bed and sleep well at night, knowing there are risks in doing something different. It's really hard to sleep well at night, knowing that we're going to get up and do the same thing that we did yesterday and get the same outcomes. And so I think that, we don't, I think the whole concept of tribal compacting is to do just that, is to create more of an engagement in student engagement and parent engagement, and do that through a new journey to that destination of a great education, tribal compacting. I think that, and you said this well too, in other places in the country, the public education system is truly viewed as a place of opportunity. And so people see that as an economic, a pathway out of, poverty and those sorts of things. But because of our history, I think Alaska Native people see the public education system, because of what happened, is more of assimilation than opportunity. And so by doing tribal compacting, we give them an opportunity. We all can let go of how that was happened and have a new beginning with a new kind of system that will have risk associated with it because it is new, but won't be the same system that created that kind of context.
So let me ask each of you, and I suggested it a few minutes ago. The proposal that we're talking about would be this education compact between the state and tribes. And I should ask, do you see a role for the ANCs?
Yes, and yes, and no. The first part on that is when we talk about the demonstration, we don't know yet how many projects that'll be. Might be 10, might be 15, might be 5, might be 3,
That
right?
be
So
dependent on capacity, or what do you?
it will depend a lot on cost and how quickly the commissioner and his team can scale up, and how skilled we have facilitating negotiations on key things, and do that, as well as I view it as the incentives that you put all around it. People have the resources that they need to do. In regard to the role for corporations, you are as familiar as I am that corporations are considered Indian tribes for certain purposes under federal law. In fact, I think for about 200 different laws that they are considered. I think that's an open question whether or not that plays into this compacting of schools right now. I don't believe the corporations using their tribal status do any compacting at all, but we're not looking at including anybody from doing anything. At this point, we're just trying to test it out. And one of the areas that we also thought that would be a selling point for this compacting is looking at the experience of the Bureau of Indian Affairs when they did compacting for the first time. The Congress authorized 10 tribes to embark in that. Tlingit and Haida was the first one from Alaska that participated, and they studied really careful budget so that when they were in negotiations with the state, they knew what they were talking about. They knew what they could commit to do and what they couldn't do. The second year, they opened it up for 10 more tribes, and Coeric and Nome was the second tribal organization that was able to take advantage of it. They built on what Tlingit and Haida did in studying the budget. I remember when Loretta Bullard had executed that first compact for Coeric, they were able to squeeze out of the system $750,000 that went more to the grassroots level that was picked up on different levels of the government. And so I think not only compacting is an efficient mechanisms on that, but I think that we're going to see, as we build more flexibility into that, we're going to be able to stretch the resources further.
So then to the question that I was going to ask of each of you, we're able to stand up project, and again, the extent, how many yet to be defined, many things still yet to be defined. But what would you describe as success from this educational compacting? How do you define success? Now that you start, we'll just go around the table.
I would define success is tribal ownership over education. And I look back to when we first started dealing with the sobriety movement in the Native community, and we had lots of problems with alcohol. And then all of a sudden you had one person stand up at the AFN convention and say, you know what, I quit drinking and it's now been 10 years. And then you might a little bit later, you'd have more. And you had a whole shift in attitude and respect in the Native community where they no longer were willing to tolerate drinking in public Native meetings. In fact, it became a badge of honor that when you could talk about what you have done and how you're doing it and stuff. I think success is at the AFN convention, you had communities saying, we've finally taken over this education system. Look at what we're accomplishing and doing, and look how well our children are. And, we're having great attendance records, and our children are learning about their history. They're learning about their environment where they're, I mean, I just think that you will see the growing sense of that. It's not something you'd be able to tell in the first year or second. It is when the enthusiasm and the energy is harnessed to make that happen. I mean, health compacting could have fallen flat. And in fact, the negotiations for the Tribal Health Consortium, that negotiating went on 2 years, and then they hit a roadblock. They couldn't get that last part. Congress had to come in and step in and kind of, that expression, divide the baby, solve the last problem for that to go forward. We may have that same thing in education, whereas as we have people goodwill working, but you have one particular obstacle that's in our way. In that case, go back to the legislature and say, we have a problem here. We need more flexibility here. Or we go to the Congress, say we need more flexibility or right over that. But it is building up that momentum and that enthusiasm where people are really proud. And I think you'll just see it over the years, even just at the AFN convention, on how people deal with education. Once you unleash that pride and you give people the ownership where they're taking the responsibility, but giving them the flexibility to do it. That's how I.
Senator, how would you define success? And, maybe in your view, because you have been involved in different approaches, clearly, maybe it's not necessarily the compacting, but what is success look like with regards to education for Alaska Native children?
Long view and short view. So long view, adults will be professionals. They will have certificates. They will be able to support their families and provide for their families from the land, from employment, and they will be able to communicate with their elders and their future generation in their Indigenous language, because in that language encapsulates everything that makes us strong. Short view, how would we know this is working? You'll have students who aren't dropping out. They see themselves in their curriculum, in their daily activities in school, because they go home to an environment that is right now very different than a lot of classrooms, the way that they're set up. But they'll be more engaged in school. We'll have a higher graduation rate, less absenteeism. I took notes when William, because I remember that, William, that absenteeism was one of the reasons you guys went the charter school route. That's a real issue. And when I was in Northwest Arctic just recently, and one of our communities talked about their high absenteeism rate, the Inupiaq instructor said, that's funny because on Inupiaq days, all those kids who are never here come back to school that day. They come back to fish with their teachers. They come back to get on in a boat, get on the land, but they're not attending school those other days. So, which to me says there's a real disconnect of that human spirit. And yeah, there are all kinds of other things that happen, including, do parents support the education that your child is getting in a school that exists right now? what I see right now, and it kind of goes back to some of the things Julie said about leveraging technology and the resources that can provide for an innovative school, it's kind of happening already. We have young parents learning these cultural practices through social media right now. I'm telling you, there's just pent up interest and movement on the part of young parents and young family members. They're already innovating, moving, sharing, connecting already through some of the social media platforms that have broken down barriers for them. And I do think that when these parents see the schools also teaching some of the things they're pursuing for themselves, you're going to see a high parent engagement. This isn't, I don't know if you remember Gear Up, the federal program that used to operate, I don't know, Gear Up. It was a college preparatory program for middle school. We took a Gear Up grant in my district. And we thought what we were doing was providing opportunities for seventh grade students to understand the training and career opportunities that could be provided for them in region. But we had a challenge with how we were going to chaperone seventh graders to come into one village together to do this. So the best way out for us was to plan for parents to travel with them. It turned out that parents were way more engaged in their students about what we were teaching their seventh grade students because they hadn't seen those opportunities either yet. And that same thing has the potential to happen in this transformative education system. Parents will finally have the opportunity to re-engage in learning opportunities they didn't have provided for them. And I think that's going to be a powerful message to the elders who are waiting for this to happen and the children who need for this to happen.
Commissioner.
Well, as I said before, I think success, the destination hasn't changed, and that is, and maybe you were in the legislature when this was put in statute, but 1403.015, that all students will succeed in their education and work, shape worthwhile and satisfying lives for themselves, amplify the best values of society, their culture, and be effective in improving the character and quality of the world about them. And I think that's still success. And I would add, based on your opening comments and the events of the day, that would include treasuring their freedom and being willing to defend it. Secondly, I would say that I think success is something that we've already seen and got a taste of, which is why I'm here and so passionate about moving this forward. And Sandy kind of alluded to it, and that is that Alaska Native people are super excited about educating their kids in the system that they get to do that in. And we've seen through this conversation and partnership with AFN, so many people, hundreds of people showing up to webinars that President Kitka has hosted, really interested in this topic and educating their kids. I think that's a taste of success that should motivate all of us to keep going and exploring this pathway.
Millennium. Success.
All right, thank you. I would like to let the tribes know that what goes in front of them are theirs. They own it. Also, learning helps the students. It creates students that are stewards of their community. So I would like our students and our instructors to know that all this, science, math, and literacy are ours. And I want to say that when we engage in subsistence activity, when we go out, we may not always succeed or get what we're going out for. We may have to go out maybe multiple times before we even are able to harvest or gather what we go out to do. So, like our commissioner stated, it is a process. It's not something that you just learn one time. You have to learn it. You have to continually learn it. it's not just a one-time thing. I would like our tribes to know that what goes in front of them are theirs. That's success. That is a success.
It's about that ownership. Comments to that. We're just about to the 4 o'clock hour, which means we've got to wrap here. But I want to get everybody an opportunity to make any final or concluding remarks that they want to make sure we get on that record. But before we do that, I'm going to ask one last question to you, Commissioner, just in terms of readiness within the department to undertake the kind of demonstration project that we're taking on. And in that, do you look at this as different than what the state engages with, for instance, communities that are wanting to establish some type of charter school or other school type? So, I mean, do you have a model that you can work with to make this easier, or is this entirely different? Just wondering about the readiness on your end.
Yeah, thank you. So we're ready, and we're part of that is because we have the good fortune of having a state board of education that said, "Be ready. Like, this is a priority," and so we're ready. That doesn't mean we have all the answers, but I think I don't want us to have all the answers and give to them. I want to have this partnership because that's what's making it work. And so we have models that I think we can draw upon, but not one that we want to set on the table and say, let's do this. We want to create this new pathway and journey with our partners and build something new, and instead of, as I said before, us building it and saying, hey, here's a great new idea, letting them say, hey, could we do this, and work with it. So I think that, like, our charter laws in this state require that everything runs through the local school board, and tribal compacting would be different than that. So our charter laws in Alaska wouldn't be the perfect model. There are other states with different kinds of charter laws that can inform the pathway, and I know AFN and others are looking at those models. You mentioned the state of Washington, and so we have lots of resources to draw upon, but at the end of the day, I hope this looks very Alaskan and has lots of fingerprints on it.
Well, I think you said it, Sandra. I wrote it down here somewhere. It's education by Alaska Natives and for Alaska Natives. So we are at 4 o'clock. So I would like to offer each of you an opportunity to share anything to supplement what you have already said, or if something has not been touched upon, we'd welcome that. And I've been going around the table this way, so I think I'm going to go to our friend and colleague who is here virtually. So William, if you would like to add anything final. Also know that, not meaning to put you on the spot, but this record is going to be held open. And so there'd be an opportunity to supplement in writing, but I know it's oftentimes just much more easy while we're in the midst of this conversation to add any final thoughts that you might have.
All right, thank you, Senator McCarthy. We need a system that supports tribes' ability to educate. Our own students. This includes infrastructure, not just infrastructures for buildings, culture, and language. Right now, I mean, we struggle. How can we do this? Many of our first time UPIC immersions parents are not English speaker. I mean, not Yupik speakers. Yupik is something that they don't know. So I somehow one of the innovation steps may be to do some the reverse engineering or something like that. So that's my thought. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I so appreciate what you provided to the committee and your leadership out there in Hooper Bay. So thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioner Johnson, final thoughts.
Just thank you again for holding the hearing. Thank your staff for all the support they provided leading up to it. Thank you for all the partners. I am not afraid. I'm not worried. I have every confidence that tribes in Alaska are going to help light this pathway forward, and that in the future, I'll look back and consider it a great privilege that I get to be part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your leadership at the state level. We know it's not an easy job, but I will tell you, it's very heartening as one who deals with folks who work within, whether it's state administrations or federal administrations, and oftentimes there's a hesitancy to try to explore the new ideas because it's just harder. And so not only your willingness, but the State Board of Education, the administration that's behind this, it is appreciated. So thank you for that. Sandy.
Put it out there. I know you asked the commissioner if the department was ready, and there really is this sense right now of move forward and not move forward right now. And it's because of how careful this has to be done so that nothing pulls the rug out of it in the future. So when we ask the department, are you ready? They're as ready as they should be, because me as a state board member, I'm going to be saying the department better not get in the way. So you better be ready to be not ready so that there is time to understand what negotiations is. And all of that, all of those pieces are key. And so when people say they want us to go, like I have state board members who like ride in a car with me and like, Sandy, why aren't we doing anything? I'm like, it has to be done well enough that it's going to be a successful demonstration project. And there's so much that's going to come before it that I don't even understand, that people like Julie understand much better. But we want to, I think it's important that we make sure it's done well and done right. And absolutely gets to the heart of what our tribe really want. So there's going to be a lot of localness to it as well. So I just wanted to say that.
That's good advice, because I think that there is a desire to make it happen, but we also want to make it happen right. And this should not be viewed as, well, that was a nice social experiment.
Right.
This is about kids, children, and their education, and so keeping that always top of mind and ensuring that while we want to move with efficiency, you do want to make sure that you've got it right. So thank that guidance. You're having me.
Thank you so much for your time and attention on that. I'll leave one mental image for you. When you think about this tribal compacting, is we need partners on the federal side to go along with us as we help it. We're going to need additional resources in incorporating Indigenous knowledge into the curriculum. And I'll give you the example of, think of the map of Alaska that we all know, and the map of the United States where Alaska is in a little box. And think how difficult it is to try to convince other Americans how big Alaska is and how important it is. And, you know, that we're 1/5 the size of the United States, everything, just because the educational system and the culture one put us in the little box. That's what we're going to be trying to overcome in this whole system. In order for this compact and our tribes to be successful, they need that additional resources and incentives on the federal level to support them as they move along, and support the teachers, and put resources in some of the other innovations going, so everybody's not saying, well, you're taking money away from me and you're doing this and stuff. It all needs to be forward looking and supportive. But I just offer you that map example is what we're trying to overcome with doing this.
Well, it is a good reminder, and I think just well said. As we are focused on how we can do right by Alaska Native children here in this state, I am reminded as someone who's been on the Indian Affairs Committee since I came to the United States Senate, I am reminded that the federal government really has not done right by Native children across the country, and we see that in many of the the assessments that we see about these gaps in learning. And Sandy, you mentioned No Child Left Behind, and while we didn't like NCLB, it really did manage to shine a very directed target on who we were failing, and we were failing Native children, and in fairness, within that system, within the BIE system, in my view, we are still failing. And perhaps it is because we have not been able to get out of the format, the structure that has been in place. And there's an effort to say, well, we just need to put more money towards it. But if the system is broken, if the system is not workable, putting more money towards a broken system isn't going to change it. So I listen to the level of optimism and the willingness to really bring about systemic change. And I think that perhaps, as we have done with compacting for healthcare and demonstrating to the rest of the country how we can do it differently in Alaska and provide first level quality of care in a place where it's really hard to do, that perhaps we can be the model for how we educate our indigenous populations, and Alaska can once again lead, because right now we're doing a disservice to Native children. So Julie, I hear what you're saying about the resources. I am not I'm not naive to know that there are fights that go on about the allocation of monies. Happens to be within my appropriations subcommittee, so I know very, very well. But this should not be viewed as a threat to others' budgets. I think hopefully we can shape this so that it is viewed as there is a new approach to finding solutions to what has been a failed system for our Native children. So we've got some work to do. You've given us some important suggestions. Know that this hearing record is going to be kept open for 2 weeks. So you may see committee members that will be submitting follow-up questions for the record. So we would ask that you continue with providing your insights there. And again, if there's anything that you might wish to supplement for the record, know that we welcome that as well. But these are important conversations, and I'm pleased to have been able to bring the conversation back to Alaska. We want to thank everybody who's been involved in organizing this field hearing. Thanks to the APU staff. I want to thank my staff who have been very helpful, and to the committee staff as well. A recording of this hearing is going to be posted on the committee's website, so that is out there for those who have participated virtually. We thank you for that. For those who have traveled to get here, we wish you safe travels back home. And with that, committee stands adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
It was